You can't bully us. We know our rights.
She was screaming into the phone, her voice cracking with panic, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the device. Please, Mr. Harrison, I didn't know. They were just children, I thought. The voice on the other end cut through her desperation like ice. You thought what, Sandra? That you could humiliate my grandchildren on Airline? This wasn't just any complaint. This wasn't just any family. And what happened 30,000 feet in the air that day would expose a truth that too many people face every single time they travel. But before we get to how it all unraveled, before we get to the moment when everything this flight attendant thought she knew came crashing down around her, we need to go back. Back to where it all started. Back to a sunny afternoon at JFK International Airport, where a father and his 3 beautiful children had no idea they were about to face a nightmare. Marcus Harrison stood in the premium boarding area, a tall, distinguished black man in his late 30s, wearing a crisp navy blazer over dark jeans and a simple white shirt. There was something calm about him, something steady in the way he carried himself. The kind of presence that made people feel safe. And right now, that's exactly what his 3 children needed. Zara, his oldest at 10 years old, sat cross-legged on the airport seating with a book propped open on her knees. Not just any book, a detailed guide to aviation and aircraft engineering. Her bright eyes scanned the pages with the kind of focus most adults couldn't manage. She'd been fascinated with planes since she was 5, always asking questions about how they flew, why they stayed in the air, what made them work. Her natural hair was pulled back into 2 neat puffs, and she wore a purple hoodie with jeans and her favorite sneakers, the ones with the little lights that blinked when she walked. Beside her, 8-year-old Amara was lost in her own world, colored pencils spread out around her as she sketched in her drawing pad. She was quieter than her sister, more reserved, the kind of child who noticed everything but said little. Today she was drawing what looked like the London skyline, Big Ben, the London Eye, Tower Bridge, all from memory of pictures she'd studied online. She had her father's thoughtful expression, and she wore a soft pink cardigan over a white dress with small flowers on it. Her hair was braided beautifully, with colorful beads at the ends that clicked softly whenever she moved her head. And then there was Elijah. 7 years old and pure energy. He was currently on his knees on the carpet, making his toy airplane zoom through the air, complete with sound effects. Neo. Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for landing. He had no idea how eerily prophetic those words would become. Elijah wore a red t-shirt with a cartoon superhero on it, cargo shorts, and light-up shoes that matched his sister Zara's. His hair was cut short, neat, and he had the biggest smile you'd ever seen. The kind of kid who made friends everywhere he went. Marcus watched his 3 children with a mixture of love and something else. Something heavier. Pride, yes. But also a kind of protective sadness that fathers like him carry. Because he knew the world wouldn't always see what he saw when he looked at them. The world wouldn't always see brilliant, creative, joyful children. Some people would see something else first. And he'd spent their entire lives trying to shield them from that reality while also preparing them for it. It was an impossible balance. Zara, sweetheart, we're boarding in about 15 minutes, Marcus said gently. Zara looked up from her book and grinned. Did you know that the Boeing 787 Dreamliner uses 50% composite materials in its construction? That's why it's more fuel efficient than older models. Marcus smiled. I did not know that. Is that what we're flying on today? Zara checked the boarding passes her father had given her earlier. No, we're on an Airbus A350. Also really advanced. It has a wider cabin and better air pressure regulation so we won't feel as tired when we land. Well then, I'm glad you're our family aviation expert, Marcus said, ruffling her hair gently. Amara looked up from her drawing. Daddy, do you think Grandma will like this? She held up her sketch. It was remarkably detailed for an 8-year-old. Marcus crouched down to her level. Baby girl, Grandma is going to love that. She's going to put it right on her refrigerator, I guarantee it. Amara smiled, a small, shy smile, and went back to adding details. Elijah zoomed over with his toy plane. Dad, can I sit by the window? Please? I want to see the clouds. We'll figure out the seating when we board, buddy. But I think we can make that happen. Yes. Elijah pumped his fist in the air and went back to his imaginary flight. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at a photo for just a moment. It was a picture of him and his late father, Thomas Harrison, standing in front of a tall glass building. The sign above them read, Harrison Global Holdings Headquarters. Both men were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. His father had passed away 3 years ago, and Marcus still felt the loss every single day. Thomas Harrison had built an empire, not just in real estate and investments but in aviation. He'd founded Harrison Atlantic Airlines with a simple mission: make air travel dignified and accessible for everyone. Not just the wealthy. Not just the privileged. Everyone. Marcus had stepped away from the day-to-day operations of the family business after his wife died 2 years ago. Raising 3 children alone required his full attention, and his brother James had taken over as CEO. But Marcus was still on the board. Still a major shareholder. Still very much part of the Harrison legacy. His children knew their family had money, knew that Grandma lived in a big house and that Uncle James ran companies, but they didn't fully grasp the scope of it. And that's how Marcus wanted it. He wanted them to grow up humble, grounded, aware of their privilege but not defined by it. "Excuse me, is this boarding area for Flight 447 to London?" a voice nearby asked. Marcus glanced over to see a gate agent. Her name tag read Patricia, speaking to her colleague. "Yes, that's us," the colleague responded. Patricia looked at her screen, then glanced around the waiting area. Her eyes landed on Marcus and his children. She leaned closer to her colleague and whispered something. It was too quiet for Marcus to hear clearly, but he saw the look. He'd seen it 1,000 times before. The colleague glanced over too, and they both had that same expression. That same question in their eyes. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that some battles you fight and some you let go. This was an airport gate agent whispering to a colleague. It was rude. It was probably exactly what he thought it was. But it wasn't worth the energy. Not yet. But he had heard something. Just a fragment. First-class tickets. Wonder how they afforded those. The words drifted over, and Marcus's hands clenched briefly before he forced himself to relax. Zara had looked up from her book. She'd heard it too. She was smart, perceptive, too aware for a 10-year-old. "Dad?" she said quietly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Don't worry about it," Marcus said softly. But it wasn't okay. And he knew it. And somewhere deep down Zara knew it too. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now beginning boarding for Flight 447 to London Heathrow. We'd like to welcome our first-class passengers and our premium members to board at this time." Marcus gathered his children. "Okay team, let's get our stuff together. Zara, you got your book? Amara, your drawing pad? Elijah, your plane?" "Got it," they answered in unison. They lined up in the priority boarding lane, Group 1, First Class. Marcus had the boarding passes on his phone, and he held Elijah's hand while the girls walked just ahead of him. As they approached the gate, he scanned the passes and the agent, Patricia, looked at them with barely concealed surprise. "First class," she said, as if confirming something she couldn't believe. "Yes," Marcus replied evenly. "Have a good flight," she said, but her tone was flat, almost mechanical. They walked down the jetway, Elijah bouncing with excitement, Zara explaining to Amara about the boarding process and aircraft design, Marcus bringing up the rear, that protective father energy radiating from him. When they stepped onto the aircraft, they were greeted by the cabin crew. And this is where everything really began. The head flight attendant was a woman named Sandra. Mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, perfectly applied makeup, crisp uniform. She'd been with the airline for 20 years. She stood near the first-class galley with 2 other crew members. Jessica, younger, maybe late 20s, with an uncertain smile and nervous energy, and Robert, older, early 50s, with a weathered face and an expression of complete indifference. Sandra's professional smile was in place as passengers boarded, but when Marcus and his children stepped into the first-class cabin and moved toward their seats, 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D, Sandra's expression changed. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But Marcus noticed. The smile tightened. The eyes narrowed just slightly. The welcoming energy evaporated. Marcus helped his children get settled. Elijah got his window seat, bouncing with excitement. Zara sat next to him, already pulling out her book. Amara sat across the aisle next to Marcus, clutching her drawing pad. "This is so cool." Elijah whispered loudly. "Buddy, we need to keep our voices down, okay?" "Inside voices on the plane," Marcus reminded him gently. "Okay, Dad." "Inside voices," Elijah whispered, which was still pretty loud but much better. Sandra approached and her tone was clipped. "Excuse me, sir, I'll need to verify your boarding passes." Marcus looked up at her, a bit surprised. Passengers around them had already been seated without this request. "Of course," he said calmly, pulling up the digital boarding passes on his phone. Sandra examined them. Not just a glance. She really studied them. She held the phone at different angles as if checking for something. As if they might be fake. "These are legitimate," she finally said, and there was surprise in her voice. maybe even disappointment. Yes, they are, Marcus said, his tone still calm but with an edge underneath. Is there a problem? No. No problem. Just standard procedure, Sandra said, but it clearly wasn't. Other passengers hadn't been subjected to this scrutiny. Sandra walked away and Marcus took a slow breath. Zara leaned over from across the aisle. Dad, why did she do that? She whispered. Just routine, sweetie. Don't worry, Marcus said, but Zara was 10 and she was smart and she knew it wasn't routine. The plane continued boarding. First class filled up with a mix of business travelers, a few families, an elderly Asian woman who smiled warmly at the children, a young businessman in an expensive suit, a couple on what looked like their honeymoon. Normal people. Most of them kind. The cabin crew began their pre-flight routine. Safety demonstrations. Checking overhead bins. Taking drink orders. And this is where the differential treatment became impossible to ignore. Elijah raised his hand politely the way Marcus had taught him. Excuse me, can I have some apple juice, please? Sandra walked right past him. Didn't even acknowledge that he'd spoken. She stopped at the row in front of them, 2 white passengers, a man and woman in business attire. Can I get you anything to drink before takeoff? She asked warmly. They ordered water and coffee. Sandra smiled, nodded, and moved on to the next row. Again white passengers. Again warm and attentive service. Elijah's hand was still raised. Dad, I don't think she heard me, he said quietly. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he kept his voice gentle. I see that, buddy. We'll get your juice in a minute. Zara was watching everything. Amara was watching too, her big eyes taking it all in, processing what it meant. Sandra finally circled back. Did you need something? She asked, her tone significantly colder than it had been with the other passengers. Yes, my son would like some apple juice, please, Marcus said evenly. We'll be serving beverages after takeoff, Sandra said. You just took drink orders from everyone else, Marcus pointed out, keeping his tone respectful but firm. Those were pre-departure beverages. Your son can have juice once we're in the air, Sandra replied, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. Marcus looked at the couple in front of them, literally drinking their pre-departure beverages right now. He could press this. He could make an issue of it. But his children were watching. They were learning how to handle this. And lesson 1 was, choose your battles. Okay. Thank you, Marcus said, even though every part of him wanted to say much more. Sandra walked away. Jessica, the younger flight attendant, had witnessed the exchange. She looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just went back to the galley, avoiding eye contact. And Robert, the senior flight attendant, had also seen it. He'd heard every word. And he did absolutely nothing. He just continued checking overhead bins as if nothing had happened. The elderly Asian woman in the row behind them leaned forward. That was ridiculous, she said quietly to Marcus. I saw what just happened. That was completely uncalled for. Marcus turned and gave her a small, appreciative smile. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I'm Mrs. Chen, she said. Former flight attendant myself, actually. 35 years. What she just did. Not okay. Marcus Harrison, he replied, shaking her hand. These are my children, Zara, Amara, and Elijah. Beautiful children, Mrs. Chen said warmly. And well-behaved too, I can tell. You're doing a wonderful job with them. Thank you. I try, Marcus said. The plane began to push back from the gate. The pilots made their announcements. The aircraft taxied toward the runway. Elijah pressed his face against the window, mesmerized. Dad, we're moving. We're really moving. Despite everything, Marcus smiled. This was still his son's joy. This was still a trip to see Grandma. This was still supposed to be a good memory. The engines roared to life and the plane accelerated down the runway. Faster, faster, and then, that incredible moment, liftoff. The ground fell away and they were airborne. Whoa! Elijah breathed, his eyes wide. We're flying. We're actually flying. Zara grinned, enjoying her brother's excitement even though she'd flown many times before. Amara gripped her father's hand during takeoff, and Marcus squeezed back reassuringly. You're okay, baby girl? We're safe. I've got you. The plane climbed steadily, breaking through the clouds, the sky opening up into brilliant blue above them. The seatbelt sign remained on for the initial climb and then, ding, it turned off. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. You're free to move about the cabin, but we recommend you remain seated with your seatbelt fastened while seated. Sandra emerged from the galley with the beverage cart. This was it. The moment when service would truly begin. And the moment when Marcus and his children would realize that this flight was going to be nothing like they expected. Sandra started at the front of the cabin, working her way back. She was all smiles with the first few rows. Cheerful. Attentive. Asking about preferences, offering options, treating people with warmth and respect. Then she got to the Harrison family. Beverages? She asked, her tone flat. Yes, apple juice for my son, please. And I'll have, Marcus began. One moment, Sandra cut him off and turned to the passengers across the aisle, a white couple. And for you? Can I offer you champagne, orange juice, our signature Bloody Mary perhaps? The couple ordered wine and water. Sandra poured their drinks with care, making pleasant small talk. Then she turned back to Marcus. You said apple juice? She asked as if she'd forgotten, even though it had been 30 seconds. Yes. Apple juice for Elijah. Ginger ale for Zara. Water for Amara. And I'll have coffee black, please. Sandra poured a small cup of apple juice, the smallest cup Marcus had ever seen served in first class, and placed it on Elijah's tray table without a word. No napkin. No friendly comment. She gave Zara her ginger ale and Amara her water with the same cold efficiency. And then she poured Marcus's coffee and moved on without asking if he needed cream or sugar, without any of the attentiveness she'd shown other passengers. The young businessman across the aisle, Derek was his name, looked over at Marcus with an uncomfortable expression. He'd noticed. He'd seen the difference in treatment. But like Jessica, like Robert, like most people, he said nothing. Because it's easier that way. Because calling it out means confrontation. Because maybe, just maybe, he was reading too much into it. Except he wasn't. And everyone who was paying attention knew he wasn't. Marcus took a sip of his coffee and looked out the window at the clouds below. His children drank their beverages, oblivious to the deeper implications but aware that something felt off. That the flight attendant wasn't very nice. That she seemed angry at them for some reason they couldn't understand. Dad, can I play on the tablet now? Elijah asked. Sure, buddy. Keep the volume low, okay? Marcus pulled out the tablets he'd packed for the kids. Long flights meant entertainment and he'd loaded them up with movies, games, and books. The kids settled in and Marcus tried to relax. Tried to let it go. But 45 minutes into the flight, something happened that made letting it go impossible. Something that crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Elijah was watching a cartoon on his tablet, completely absorbed, his little cup of apple juice on the tray table in front of him. He reached for it without looking, his eyes still on the screen, and his hand bumped the cup. Not hard. Just a little nudge. But it was enough. The cup tipped over, spilling apple juice across his tray table and down onto the seat. It wasn't a lot. Maybe 4 ounces of liquid. A tiny stain on the seat cushion. The kind of thing that happens literally every single day in the airline industry, especially with children. Elijah's eyes went wide. Oh no. Dad, I spilled. Marcus immediately grabbed napkins. It's okay, buddy. Accidents happen. Don't worry. He started wiping up the juice, dabbing at the seat. It was barely anything. But Sandra had seen it. And she came storming over like Elijah had just committed a felony. This is exactly why children don't belong in first class, she said loudly, her voice dripping with disdain. The entire cabin could hear her. Every single passenger turned to look. Marcus froze, the napkin in his hand, and looked up at her with an expression that could have frozen fire. Excuse me, he said quietly, dangerously. This is a premium cabin. Do you know how much these seats cost to clean? Sandra continued, as if she were scolding a misbehaving dog rather than speaking about a 7-year-old child. He's 7 years old, Marcus said, his voice tight, controlled, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. Accidents happen. I'm cleaning it up right now. Not in my cabin, they don't, Sandra snapped. Elijah looked like he was about to cry. Amara had gone very still, her eyes huge, scared. Zara had put down her book and was staring at Sandra with an expression of pure shock. Marcus stood up slowly. He was tall, and when he stood, he had a presence that made people take a step back. Sandra did, just slightly. I'm quite aware of the costs of this cabin, Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. I'll happily pay for any cleaning that needs to be done. Sandra scoffed. I'm sure you will, she said, and the sarcasm in her tone made it crystal clear what she meant. She didn't think he could afford it. She didn't think he belonged here. And she was making sure everyone knew it. From behind them, Mrs. Chen's voice rang out. Miss, that is completely uncalled for. He's a child. Sandra turned to her. Ma'am, please allow me to do my job. Your job is to provide service, not to humiliate a 7-year-old boy for spilling a few drops of juice, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Derek, the businessman, also spoke up. Seriously, I've seen adult passengers spill entire glasses of wine and get treated better than this. Sandra's face flushed red. She was being challenged and she didn't like it. If you have complaints about my service, you're welcome to file them with the airline after the flight, she said tightly. Jessica appeared with a cleaning cloth and quietly started helping Marcus wipe down the seat. She wouldn't make eye contact with him, but at least she was helping. Thank you, Marcus said to her softly. Jessica just nodded, still looking down. The juice was cleaned up in less than 2 minutes. It was nothing. A non-issue. But the damage was done. Amara had started crying, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks. Elijah looked devastated, like he'd done something terrible. And Zara looked angry in a way that made Marcus's heart hurt, because she was 10 and she was already learning these lessons. Hey, Marcus said gently, crouching down in the aisle between his children. Listen to me. All of you. This is not your fault. Elijah, you didn't do anything wrong. Accidents happen. Amara, baby girl, don't cry. We're okay. Zara, I see that look on your face and I understand it, but we're going to handle this the right way. What's the right way, Dad? Zara asked, her voice shaking. Because that wasn't fair. That wasn't right. You're absolutely correct. It wasn't fair and it wasn't right. But we don't sink to other people's level. We rise above it. And we make sure that what happened here doesn't happen to someone else. Do you understand? Zara nodded slowly. Amara wiped her eyes. Elijah whispered, I'm sorry, Daddy. You have nothing to be sorry for, buddy. Nothing at all. Marcus settled his children back into their seats, made sure they were okay, and then he did something that would change everything. He pulled out his phone. Sandra, who was watching from the galley, immediately tensed. Sir, if you're recording me, that's illegal on this aircraft, she called out. Marcus didn't even look at her. I'm not recording, he said calmly. I'm sending a message. Who are you messaging? Sandra asked, and there was something in her voice now. A hint of nervousness. Marcus typed deliberately, his jaw set, his eyes focused. Someone who needs to know about the service on this flight. Sandra let out a nervous laugh. Sir, if you're planning to complain to the airline, you're welcome to do so after we land. Marcus finished typing and looked up at her. Made direct eye contact. And what he said next was delivered with absolute certainty. Oh, I will. Trust me, I will. He hit send. And 30,000 feet in the air, a message traveled at the speed of light to someone who had the power to change everything. But Sandra didn't know that yet. She just knew that something about this passenger unsettled her. Something about the way he carried himself. The way he spoke. The calm, controlled anger. She walked back to the galley and Robert finally approached her. Sandra, maybe you should ease up, he said quietly. They paid for first class just like everyone else. Don't tell me how to do my job, Sandra hissed. Something's off about them. Did you see how he's acting? Entitled, aggressive. He's not being aggressive, Jessica interrupted softly. He's being calm. We're the ones who, stay out of this, Sandra snapped at her. You're new. You don't understand how things work. But Jessica did understand. She understood that they were treating this family terribly. She understood that it was wrong. And she understood that she was too scared of Sandra to do anything about it. And that made her complicit. In the cabin, Marcus held Amara's hand as she slowly calmed down. Elijah had gone back to his cartoon, though his joy was diminished. Zara stared out the window, processing everything, her brilliant young mind trying to make sense of cruelty. And Marcus sat there, his children around him, and waited. Because he'd just set something in motion. Something that Sandra, Jessica, and Robert had no idea was coming. The message Marcus had sent was simple. Only 3 sentences. But those 3 sentences would trigger a chain reaction that would reach all the way to the top of one of the largest airline conglomerates in the world. James, we have a serious problem on Flight 447. The crew is treating the kids terribly. Discrimination. Clear and documented. Handle this. James Harrison received the message while he was in a board meeting at Harrison Global Holdings headquarters in Manhattan. He was Marcus's younger brother by 2 years, but he'd always been the more corporate of the two. Where Marcus was contemplative and preferred family life, James thrived in boardrooms and executive suites. He'd taken over as CEO when Marcus stepped back after his wife's death, and he'd done an exceptional job. But family came first. Always. James excused himself from the meeting, stepped into his private office, and immediately called the CEO of Harrison Atlantic Airlines. Because here's what Sandra didn't know. What none of the crew knew. What even most of the passengers didn't know. Harrison Atlantic wasn't just any airline. It was founded by Thomas Harrison, Marcus and James's father, 30 years ago. And while the Harrison family had sold majority shares to make it publicly traded, they still owned 40% of the company's stock. They were the largest single shareholders. They had seats on the board. And they had significant influence over every major decision the airline made. The current CEO, Richard Blackwell, had been handpicked by Thomas Harrison before he died. Richard owed his position to the Harrison family. And when James Harrison called with a complaint about one of their flights, Richard answered immediately. "James, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" Richard's voice was warm, friendly. "Richard, I need you to pull the cabin footage for Flight 447, JFK to Heathrow, currently in the air." The warmth in Richard's voice was replaced by concern. "Is everything okay? Is there a security issue?" "There's a discrimination issue. My brother and his 3 children are on that flight. They're being harassed by your cabin crew." There was a long pause. "Your brother? Marcus is on that flight. In first class. And from what he's telling me, your head flight attendant has been treating them like they don't belong there. Questioning their tickets. Refusing service. And she just humiliated his 7-year-old son for spilling a few drops of juice." Richard's voice went cold. "I'll handle this immediately. I'm pulling the footage now and I'm contacting the captain. I want a full report when they land. Every crew member involved. Every passenger witness. Everything. You'll have it?" "James, I'm sorry. This is unacceptable." "It is. And Richard? This isn't just about my family. If this happened to them, it's happening to other families. Families who don't have my brother's last name. Families who can't make a phone call that gets results. We need to fix this systemically." "Agreed. I'll start with this flight and then we'll address the broader issues." "Good. Keep me updated." James hung up and immediately texted Marcus back. "Handled. CEO is on it. Cabin footage being reviewed. Captain being contacted. I'm sorry this is happening. Give the kids my love." Marcus saw the message and showed it to Zara, who was old enough to understand what it meant. "Uncle James is taking care of it," he told her softly. "Does that mean she'll get in trouble?" Zara asked. "Yes. But more importantly, it means this won't happen to other kids. Other families." Zara nodded, satisfied with that answer. 30 minutes later, the phone in the cockpit rang. The captain, Michael Torres, had been flying for Harrison Atlantic for 15 years. He was professional, experienced, and he ran his flights by the book. When he answered and heard the CEO's voice on the other end, he knew something serious had happened. "Captain Torres, this is Richard Blackwell." "Mr. Blackwell, sir. Is everything all right? I need you to contact your head flight attendant immediately and have her call me. There's been a serious complaint filed about the treatment of passengers in first class." Captain Torres felt his stomach drop. Passenger complaints that reached the CEO mid-flight were rare. And serious. "Can you tell me what the nature of the complaint is?" "Discrimination. Harassment. Specifically targeting a family with young children. I need to speak with Sandra Patterson immediately." Sandra Patterson. Captain Torres had flown with Sandra many times. She was experienced but had a reputation for being difficult. He'd heard whispers of complaints before, but nothing that had ever reached this level. "I'll have her contact you right away, sir." "Thank you, Captain." "And Captain? The family filing this complaint?" "Marcus Harrison and his children." Captain Torres went very still. "Harrison. As in the Harrison family. As in the founders of the airline." "Understood, sir. I'll handle this immediately." Captain Torres hung up and pressed the intercom button for the cabin. "Flight attendants, please contact the cockpit." In the galley, Sandra heard the announcement. It was unusual to be called to the cockpit mid-flight unless there was an operational issue. She picked up the internal phone. "This is Sandra. Sandra, this is Captain Torres. I need you to call the CEO immediately. He's standing by." Sandra felt the blood drain from her face. "The CEO? What? What's happened?" "There's been a complaint. A serious one. Call him now. Use the air-to-ground link." Sandra's hands started shaking. A complaint that had reached the CEO mid-flight? That was nearly unheard of. She looked out at the cabin, and her eyes landed on Marcus Harrison and his children. No, it couldn't be. Could it? She went to the private crew phone system and dialed the number Captain Torres had given her. Richard Blackwell answered on the first ring. "Sandra Patterson?" "Yes, sir." "Captain Torres said you needed to speak with me?" "I do. I've received a complaint about your treatment of passengers on this flight. Specifically, a black family with 3 children in first class." Sandra felt like she might pass out. "Sir, there must be some misunderstanding. I've provided standard service. Sandra, I'm going to stop you right there. I have access to the cabin footage. I can see everything that's happened on this flight. So I'm going to ask you once, and I need you to be honest. Have you treated the Harrison family differently than other passengers? The Harrison family? Sandra's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. Marcus Harrison. Seats 2A through 2D. Have you questioned their tickets? Denied them service? Made comments about children not belonging in first class? Sandra couldn't speak. Her worst fear was being confirmed. She just spent the last 2 hours harassing and humiliating Marcus Harrison. The Marcus Harrison. Son of Thomas Harrison. Board member. Major shareholder. I didn't know who he was, Sandra finally managed to say. That's the problem, Sandra. Your treatment of passengers shouldn't depend on who they are. But let's be very clear about what's happened here. You've discriminated against a family because of their race. You've harassed children. And you've done it all while representing this airline. Do you have anything to say? Sandra was crying now. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I was having a bad day and I'm sorry. You're suspended effective immediately. When this flight lands, you'll be met by our London operations team. You'll surrender your crew credentials and be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Do you understand? Please, Mr. Blackwell. I've been with this airline for 20 years. I have bills, responsibilities, and you should have thought about that before you chose to treat passengers with such contempt. This conversation is over. Put me through to the captain. Sandra, shaking and crying, transferred the call back to the cockpit. She hung up the phone and just stood there in the galley, her career crashing down around her. Jessica approached cautiously. Sandra? What happened? What did he say? Sandra turned to her with red, swollen eyes. Do you know who that man is? The one with the children? Jessica shook her head. His name is Marcus Harrison. Harrison. As in Harrison Global Holdings. As in the family that founded this airline. As in the family that owns 40% of this company's stock. Jessica's face went white. Oh my God. I'm suspended. I'm probably going to be fired. And you? Sandra looked at her. You should start thinking about what you're going to say when they question you, because they're going to ask why you stood by and did nothing. I didn't know what to do, Jessica whispered. You're supposed to do the right thing. Sandra hissed. You're supposed to treat people with respect regardless of who they are. But I didn't, and you didn't stop me, and now we're both going to pay for it. Robert had been listening from the other galley. He'd heard everything. And for the first time his indifference cracked. Because he'd seen everything too. He'd watched Sandra harass that family. He'd watched her humiliate those children. And he'd done absolutely nothing. He'd told himself it wasn't his problem. That he was just there to do his job and go home. But silence in the face of injustice was a choice. And he'd made the wrong one. In the cabin, word had begun to spread. Not about who Marcus was, he'd been very careful to keep that quiet. But about what had happened. Passengers had seen the treatment. They'd heard Sandra's comments. And they were talking. Mrs. Chen had spoken to several other passengers, sharing what she'd witnessed. Derek had done the same. A young Indian woman named Priya had actually recorded the bathroom confrontation and the spilled juice incident on her phone. Not because she was trying to go viral, but because she'd been so appalled by what she was seeing that she wanted documentation. The mood in first class had shifted. What had started as individual passengers noticing something wrong had coalesced into collective understanding. This family had been mistreated. Badly. And people were angry about it. Marcus noticed the shift. Passengers kept coming up to him quietly to apologize. To offer support. To ask if there was anything they could do. I'm an attorney, Derek said during one of these conversations. Civil rights law. If you need witness statements, affidavits, anything, I'm here. I appreciate that, Marcus said. But I think the airline's own footage will tell the story. Still. Here's my card. I mean it. Marcus took the card and thanked him. A middle-aged white woman approached, someone Marcus hadn't even noticed before. Mr. Harrison, I just wanted to say that what happened to your family is disgraceful. I have 3 grandchildren around your kids' ages, and if anyone treated them that way... She couldn't finish the sentence, too emotional. Thank you, Marcus said gently. That means a lot. Priya came over hesitantly. Excuse me. I hope this doesn't overstep, but I recorded some of what happened. The bathroom incident and when your son spilled his juice. I wasn't trying to be invasive, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I thought maybe you'd need evidence. Marcus looked at her, surprised and touched. That's very kind of you. Can I ask what made you decide to record it? Priya hesitated, then said, I'm Indian. I'm a doctor. And I still get profiled constantly. People assume I can't afford first class. They question my credentials. They treat me like I'm somehow less than. When I saw what was happening to your family, I saw myself. I saw my parents. And I knew I had to do something, even if it was just documenting it. What's your name? Marcus asked. Priya. Priya Kapoor. Thank you, Dr. Kapoor. Truly. But I don't think I'll need the footage. The airline has cameras throughout the cabin. They'll see everything. Priya nodded, but then said, Can I give you my information anyway? Just in case? Because sometimes these things get swept under the rug. Sometimes the footage mysteriously gets corrupted or lost. And I don't want that to happen to you. Marcus smiled. You've been through this before. My parents sued a hotel chain 5 years ago for discrimination. We won, but it was a fight. And having independent documentation made all the difference. Marcus took her card. Then yes, thank you. I hope I won't need it, but I'm grateful to have it. As Priya walked back to her seat, Zara tugged on her father's sleeve. Dad, why are all these people being so nice now? They didn't help before. It was a good question. A hard question. Because sometimes people don't realize how serious something is until it's already happened, Marcus said carefully. And sometimes people are afraid to speak up in the moment. But that doesn't mean they don't care. But they should speak up in the moment, Zara said. You're absolutely right. They should. And I hope the people on this flight remember that the next time they see something wrong happening, that they'll be braver. Zara thought about that, then nodded. I would speak up, she said firmly. I know you would, sweetheart. And that makes me proud. The flight continued. Meal service came and went. Sandra had delegated it entirely to Jessica and Robert, unable to face the cabin after her conversation with the CEO. Jessica served the Harrison family with trembling hands and multiple apologies. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I should have done more. I should have stood up to her. Marcus was kind but firm. You should have. But you're young and you were scared. I understand that. What matters now is that you learn from this. I will. I promise I will. Marcus believed her. He could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. She'd made a mistake, but it wasn't the same as Sandra's malice or Robert's indifference. She could grow from this. Robert, on the other hand, avoided the Harrison family entirely. He couldn't look Marcus in the eye, because he knew. He knew he'd had the authority and the experience to intervene, and he'd chosen not to. And now he was going to face consequences for that choice. The hours passed. The children watched movies, read books, drew pictures. Marcus kept them comfortable and distracted, but he could see the impact of what had happened. Elijah was quieter than usual. Amara kept looking around nervously as if waiting for someone else to yell at her. And Zara had a hardness in her eyes that broke Marcus's heart. His baby girl, forced to grow up a little faster. Forced to understand that the world wasn't always fair. 3 hours into the flight, Marcus decided it was time to have a real conversation with his children. He gathered them around him. Elijah climbed into his lap. Zara and Amara sat close on either side. I want to talk to you three about what happened today, Marcus began. I know it was confusing and scary and unfair. Why did she hate us, Daddy? Elijah asked, his voice small. Marcus took a breath. This was the conversation every black parent had to have eventually. He'd hoped it would be later for them. But life didn't always wait. She didn't hate you, buddy. She didn't even know you. What she hated was an idea. A wrong, ugly idea that she learned somewhere along the way. What idea? Zara asked. The idea that people who look like us don't belong in certain places. Don't deserve certain things. It's called racism and it's been around for a very long time. But that's stupid, Zara said. You're absolutely right. It is stupid. It doesn't make any sense. But some people believe it anyway. Will it happen again? Amara asked quietly. Marcus wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her no, never, you'll never have to deal with this again. But he couldn't. Yes, baby girl. Probably will. Not every time you fly and not every day, but there will be other times when people judge you because of how you look instead of who you are. That's not fair, Zara said, anger in her voice. No, it's not fair. And that's why we fight it. That's why we don't just accept it and move on. That's why I sent that message. Because if we don't stand up and say this is wrong, then nothing changes. Did she get in trouble? Elijah asked. Yes, she got in trouble. And the airline is going to make sure this doesn't happen to other families. Good, Zara said firmly. But I want you all to understand something very important, Marcus continued. What happened today was wrong. But it doesn't define you. It doesn't make you less than anyone else. You are brilliant, beautiful, kind, and worthy of respect. Always. No matter what anyone else says or does. Do you understand? All three children nodded. And I also want you to know that not everyone is like that flight attendant. You saw Mrs. Chen speak up. You saw Mr. Derek offer to help. You saw Dr. Kapoor record what happened to make sure there was evidence. There are good people in the world. People who will stand with us. We're not alone. I like Mrs. Chen, Amara said. She was nice. She was. And we're going to remember the good people more than we remember the bad one. Okay. The children agreed, and Marcus held them close for a moment. His heart ached for them. For their lost innocence. For the burden they'd have to carry just because of their skin color. But he was also proud. Proud of how they'd handled it. Proud of their questions and their anger and their understanding. They were going to be okay. They were going to be strong. 2 hours from landing, the captain made an announcement that made every passenger sit up and pay attention. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Torres. I want to take a moment to address something that occurred earlier in this flight. It has come to my attention that some passengers were not treated with the respect and dignity that every person deserves, especially in our cabin. On behalf of Harrison Atlantic Airlines, I want to apologize for that failure. We are taking this matter very seriously and there will be consequences. This airline was founded on principles of equality and respect, and we will uphold those principles. To the family affected, please know that we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. And to all our passengers, thank you for your patience and understanding. The announcement was unprecedented. Captains almost never addressed passenger complaints mid-flight like this. But Captain Torres had been given explicit instructions from the CEO. Acknowledge it. Apologize publicly. Make it clear that this behavior was unacceptable. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers who hadn't even witnessed the incidents directly were clapping. Mrs. Chen was crying. Derek was nodding with approval. Priya was recording the moment. And Marcus just sat there, his children beside him, feeling something he hadn't expected to feel on this flight. Vindication. Not just for himself, but for every person who'd ever been treated this way and had no recourse. Every person who'd been told they were being too sensitive or reading too much into it. Every person who'd swallowed their anger and hurt because fighting back seemed impossible. Sandra heard the announcement from the galley and she completely broke down. She'd been hoping somehow that this could be contained. That maybe she could apologize and it would be forgotten. But the captain had just announced it to the entire plane. Her humiliation was complete and public. Jessica put a hand on her shoulder, but Sandra shook it off. Don't, she said harshly. Just don't. Robert sat in the crew jump seat, staring at nothing. He'd been flying for 30 years. He was 5 years from retirement. And he'd just thrown it all away by doing nothing when he should have done something. The rest of the flight passed in a strange kind of liminal space. The passengers were subdued but supportive. The crew was barely functional. And the Harrison family tried to make the most of what was supposed to be an exciting trip. Marcus pulled out the in-flight magazine and showed Elijah pictures of London. Look, buddy, that's where we're going. That's Big Ben. That's the London Eye. You can see the whole city from up there. Elijah's enthusiasm slowly returned. Can we go on it? Absolutely. We'll do all the touristy stuff. We'll see Buckingham Palace, feed the ducks in Hyde Park, visit the museums. It's going to be great. Zara was reading her aviation book again, but this time she was also taking notes. Dad, did you know that Heathrow is one of the busiest airports in the world? Over 80 million passengers a year. I did not know that exact number, but that sounds about right. That's a lot of people. I wonder how many of them have experiences like we did. Marcus paused. Probably more than we'd like to think. Then we should do something about it. Not just for this airline, but for all of them. Marcus looked at his 10-year-old daughter, and he saw his father in her. That same drive for justice. That same refusal to accept the world as it was when it could be better. You're absolutely right. And we will. As they began their descent into London, the captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into London Heathrow. The weather is partly cloudy, temperature is 12 degrees Celsius, that's about 54 Fahrenheit. We should be on the ground in approximately 30 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Elijah pressed his face to the window again, watching as the plane descended through the clouds. I can see the city. Dad, I can see it. Despite everything, the magic of that moment was still there. The joy of a child seeing a new place for the first time. Marcus made sure all 3 children had their seatbelts properly fastened. made sure they had everything they needed, prepared them for landing. The plane touched down smoothly, and another round of applause broke out in the cabin. It was tradition on some flights, but this one felt different. It felt like relief. Like everyone was glad this particular journey was over. As the plane taxied to the gate, Captain Torres made one final announcement. Mr. Harrison, if you and your family could please remain seated after we reach the gate, the airline's London management would like to speak with you briefly. Thank you. The other passengers began gathering their belongings. As they filed past the Harrison family, many stopped to say something. Good luck. I hope they make this right. Your children are beautiful. Thank you for standing up. Mrs. Chen stopped and handed Marcus a piece of paper. That's my contact information. If you need a witness statement or anything at all, please don't hesitate. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. For everything. No, thank you. For reminding me that standing up is the right thing to do, even when it's uncomfortable. Derek stopped next. I meant what I said. Here's my card. And I'm going to be writing about this experience on my legal blog. Not using your names or identifying information, but highlighting why these incidents matter and why airlines need to do better. I appreciate that. Priya was last. I've already started drafting a post about this for my social media. Again, no names, no identifying details about you or your kids. But people need to know this still happens. They need to understand that discrimination isn't just a thing of the past. Just please, Marcus said gently, make sure my children's faces aren't in any photos or videos. They deserve their privacy. Of course. Absolutely. It's about the issue, not about making your family a spectacle. Then yes, I appreciate you sharing this story. The cabin emptied until it was just the Harrison family, the crew, and the weight of everything that had happened. Sandra, Jessica, and Robert stood near the galley, not looking at each other, not looking at Marcus. Just waiting for whatever came next. A few minutes later, 3 people boarded the aircraft. A distinguished older white woman in a sharp business suit, her expression stern. A middle-aged South Asian man carrying a tablet, his demeanor professional and empathetic. And a younger black woman with kind eyes and a gentle presence. Mr. Harrison, the older woman said, approaching. I'm Patricia Walsh, Regional Director for Harrison Atlantic Europe. This is David Kumar, our HR representative, and Michaela Thompson, our Customer Service Manager. Marcus stood and shook their hands. Ms. Walsh, Mr. Kumar, Ms. Thompson. First, on behalf of the entire airline, I want to apologize for your experience today, Patricia began. Marcus looked at her steadily. Are you apologizing because of what happened or because of who I am? Patricia had clearly been prepared for that question, but it still made her pause. Both frankly. What happened was unacceptable regardless of who you are. But yes, the fact that it happened to you specifically makes it particularly embarrassing for us. That's the problem, Marcus said quietly. It should be equally embarrassing no matter who it happens to. Whether it's me or a single mother flying with her kids who has no connections, no resources, no way to fight back. The embarrassment should be the same because the wrong is the same. Patricia nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. And that's something we need to address systematically. David stepped forward with his tablet. Mr. Harrison, we've reviewed the cabin footage. All of it. From boarding through the present moment. Your complaint is substantiated on every single count. I never doubted it would be. Michaela, the customer service manager, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but sincere. Your children, how are they doing? Marcus glanced back at his kids. They were watching with curiosity but no fear. Zara was paying attention to every word. Amara was holding her brother's hand. Elijah was still clutching his toy plane. They're resilient, Marcus said. Like they have to be. They shouldn't have to be, Michaela said. Not like this. No child should have to learn these lessons on an airplane. No, Marcus agreed. They shouldn't. Patricia cleared her throat. We'd like to discuss resolution. Full refund of your tickets, complimentary first-class tickets for your next 5 flights, upgrade to our platinum membership with lifetime benefits, access to all of our lounges worldwide. I don't want compensation, Marcus interrupted. Patricia stopped. Mr. Harrison, I don't want free flights or lounge access or any of that. What I want is change. Real, lasting change. What kind of change? Patricia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. How many complaints have been filed against Sandra Patterson? Marcus asked. David checked his tablet. 14 formal complaints over the past 6 years. 14, Marcus repeated. And she's still employed. Previous management handled them with retraining and warnings, David explained. Retraining doesn't fix this, Marcus said firmly. This isn't a knowledge gap. This isn't a skills deficiency. This is a character issue. This is bias so deep that no amount of training is going to root it out. Sandra will be terminated, effective immediately, Patricia said. We've already made that decision. From the galley, Sandra let out a choked sob. The reality of it hitting her fully for the first time. Marcus turned to look at her. She was crying, mascara running down her face, her whole body shaking. And he felt, not sympathy exactly, but something human. Recognition that this was a person whose life was falling apart. Even if it was a consequence of her own actions. What about Jessica? Marcus asked, turning back to the managers. Jessica's eyes went wide with fear. She followed the lead flight attendant's directions, David said, checking his notes. She's only been with the company for 8 months. She's relatively new. She also had opportunities to intervene and chose not to, Marcus said. But I also saw her discomfort. I saw her try once to help clean up the spill. I saw something in her that suggested she knew it was wrong but didn't know how to stand up to a superior. He turned to Jessica. Come here, please. Jessica approached slowly, terrified. Do you understand what you did wrong? Marcus asked her directly. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I should have stood up to her. I should have treated you and your children the way I'd want my own family treated. I was scared of Sandra, scared of losing my job, and that's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse. I was wrong. No, it's not an excuse, Marcus agreed. But it's honest. And I believe you mean it. He turned back to Patricia. I want Jessica suspended for 2 weeks without pay with mandatory bias training and customer service retraining. And when she comes back, she's on probation for 6 months. Any similar incident during that time and she's done. But I think she deserves a chance to learn from this. Jessica looked stunned. You're not having me fired? I believe people can change if they want to, Marcus said. You're young. You made a mistake because you were scared and you didn't know how to do the right thing. But now you do. Now you know what happens when you stay silent. And I don't think you'll make that mistake again. I won't, Jessica said, crying openly now. I swear I won't. Thank you. Thank you so much. Patricia made a note. That's quite generous of you, Mr. Harrison. It's not generous. It's practical. She can learn. She can be better. And the airline needs good people who've learned these lessons. And Robert? Patricia asked, looking at the senior flight attendant. Robert finally looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time since the flight began. What about me? Robert said, his voice defensive. I didn't do anything. I didn't mistreat you or your kids. Exactly, Marcus said. You didn't do anything. You're a senior flight attendant. You have seniority, experience, authority. You saw everything that happened and you did nothing. It wasn't my responsibility to. When you see injustice and do nothing, you're choosing a side, Marcus said, his voice harder now. You're choosing to support it? Your silence enabled Sandra's behavior. In my book, that's just as bad. Robert's face flushed. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. That's the point, Marcus said. You didn't do anything at all. Patricia looked at Robert with something like disgust. Robert Williams, your employment with Harrison Atlantic is terminated effective immediately. You'll surrender your credentials and be escorted from the aircraft. Robert stood up, angry now. You can't fire me for not getting involved in something that wasn't my problem. We can and we are, David said calmly, making notes on his tablet. Your contract includes a clause about upholding the airline's values and providing service that reflects our commitment to dignity and respect. You violated that clause. This is because of him. Robert pointed at Marcus. Because he's got connections, because I'm what? Marcus asked quietly, standing to his full height. Say it. Finish that sentence. Robert stopped, realizing he was about to say something that would prove Marcus's entire point. He clenched his jaw shut. I thought so, Marcus said. You can go now. Security personnel had boarded during the conversation, and they escorted Robert off the aircraft. He went without another word, but the anger was radiating off him. Sandra was next. She could barely walk, she was crying so hard. Please, she said to Patricia as she passed. I have a daughter, I have medical bills, I need this job. You should have thought about that before you chose to humiliate children, Patricia said coldly. You're done, Sandra. Sandra turned to Marcus, desperate. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, if you could just, I'm not the one you should be apologizing to, Marcus said, gesturing to his children. Sandra looked at Zara, Amara, and Elijah. 3 beautiful children who'd done nothing wrong except exist in a space she didn't think they belonged. I'm sorry, she whispered to them. But the apology felt empty. Performative. A last-ditch attempt to save herself rather than genuine remorse. Zara spoke up, her voice clear and strong. Do you even know why you treated us that way? Sandra looked confused. I don't know. I was stressed, I wasn't thinking. You were thinking, Zara said. You were thinking that we didn't belong in first class. That people who look like us shouldn't be there. That's what you were thinking. Sandra opened her mouth to deny it, but the words died in her throat. Because Zara was right. And they both knew it. I hope you figure out why you think that way, Zara continued. Because until you do, you're always going to hurt people. Even if you don't mean to. Marcus had never been more proud of his daughter than he was in that moment. Sandra was escorted off the plane, and then it was just the Harrison family and the 3 managers. Mr. Harrison, Patricia said, what happened today cannot be just about these 3 employees. I understand that. What else would you like to see happen? I want a mandatory bias training program for all flight crews, Marcus said. Not just a 1-hour video they can ignore. Real, substantive training that addresses implicit bias, microaggressions, and how to intervene when they see discrimination happening. Patricia nodded, making notes. Done. I want a streamlined complaint process that doesn't get buried in bureaucracy. Right now, passengers file complaints and nothing happens. I want a dedicated team that investigates every single discrimination complaint within 72 hours. We can implement that. I want diverse hiring practices at every level, from flight attendants to executives. And I want accountability measures that apply to everyone regardless of seniority or tenure. These are significant systemic changes, Patricia said. I'm aware. I'm also aware that my father founded this airline on the principle that everyone deserves dignity and respect in travel. Thomas Harrison believed that air travel should be accessible to everyone regardless of race, income, or background. He'd be ashamed of what happened today. And if his airline is going to continue carrying his name, it needs to uphold his values. Patricia's expression softened slightly. I met your father once at a company event about 10 years ago. He was remarkable. And you're right. He would be ashamed. But he'd also be proud of how you're handling this. I'm not doing this for praise, Marcus said. I'm doing this because if it happened to my family, it's happening to other families. Families who don't have my resources, my name, my ability to make a phone call that gets results. They deserve protection too. We'll implement everything you've requested, Patricia said. You have my word and you have it in writing. David is drawing up the documentation now. David nodded, typing rapidly on his tablet. I'll have a formal commitment letter sent to you within 24 hours, Mr. Harrison, outlining every change we're implementing and the timeline for each. Good, Marcus said. Then he looked at Michaela, who'd been quiet through most of this exchange. You haven't said much. Michaela smiled sadly. I'm listening. And I'm thinking about how many times I've probably failed passengers the way we failed you today. Not as dramatically, maybe, but in small ways. Little moments of bias that I didn't catch, complaints I didn't take seriously enough. And I'm committing to doing better. That's all I can ask, Marcus said. There was a commotion at the aircraft door and a woman's voice called out. Marcus, babies. Eleanor Harrison appeared in the first-class cabin, a distinguished black woman in her early 70s, wearing an elegant coat and carrying herself with the same quiet authority as her son. She was beautiful, with silver hair styled perfectly and eyes that missed nothing. Mom, Marcus said, his whole body relaxing. Grandma, all 3 children shouted, running to her. Eleanor knelt down, not easy at her age, but she did it anyway, and wrapped all 3 children in her arms. My darlings. My beautiful darlings. Are you all right? We're okay, Grandma, Zara said. But it was scary. I know, sweetheart. I know. Eleanor stood and looked at Patricia, David, and Michaela. I'm Eleanor Harrison. Thomas Harrison was my husband. These are my grandchildren. And I assume you're handling this situation appropriately? Yes, Mrs. Harrison, Patricia said respectfully. We're implementing comprehensive changes to ensure this never happens again. Good. Because Thomas didn't build this airline to make people feel small. He built it to make travel accessible and dignified for everyone. That was his dream. We understand, Mrs. Harrison, Patricia said. And we're committed to honoring that legacy. Eleanor nodded, then looked at her son. Marcus, let's get these children home. They've been through enough for one day. Agreed. Marcus turned to the managers. I trust you'll follow through on everything we've discussed. You have my word, Patricia said. And Mr. Harrison? Thank you. For not just walking away. For using this to make things better for everyone. Marcus didn't respond to that. He just gathered his children, took his mother's arm and walked off the aircraft. As they walked through Heathrow Airport, Eleanor pulled Marcus aside while the children ran ahead slightly, excited to be on solid ground. What happened up there? Eleanor asked quietly. Marcus told her. All of it. Every detail. And as he spoke, he saw his mother's expression shift from concern to anger to sadness to determination. When he finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Your father would be so proud of you, she finally said. For how you handled it. For how you protected those babies while still standing up for what's right. I don't know if I handled it right, Marcus admitted. I keep thinking maybe I should have said more, done more. You handled it perfectly, Eleanor said firmly. You taught your children that they don't have to accept being treated badly. You taught them that speaking up matters. And you made sure that other families won't have to go through what you went through. That's everything. They collected their luggage and headed to Eleanor's car. She had a driver waiting and the kids piled into the back seat, their exhaustion finally catching up with them. On the drive to Eleanor's house in Kensington, Elijah fell asleep on his father's shoulder. Amara curled up against her grandmother. Aunt Zara stared out the window at the London streets, processing everything. Penny for your thoughts, sweetheart, Eleanor said to her oldest granddaughter. Zara was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm angry, Grandma. That's okay. You have every right to be angry. But Dad said we can't let anger make us mean. That we have to use it to make things better. Eleanor smiled. Your dad is a wise man. I want to make things better, Zara said. When I grow up, I want to make sure kids don't have to go through what we went through today. Then you will, Eleanor said. Because you're a Harrison. And Harrisons don't just accept the world as it is. We work to make it what it should be. Marcus listened to this exchange and felt something settle in his chest. His children were going to be okay. They'd been hurt today, but they hadn't been broken. They'd learned a hard lesson, but they'd learned it alongside lessons about dignity, justice, and standing up for what's right. That night, after they'd arrived at Eleanor's beautiful townhouse and the children had been fed and bathed and put to bed in the guest rooms they always used, Marcus sat in his father's study with his mother and a cup of tea. The room still smelled like his father's cologne, even 3 years after his death. The books he'd loved lined the shelves. The photos of his family covered the walls. He's here, you know, Eleanor said softly. I can feel him. Yeah, Marcus agreed. I can too. He'd want you to know that you did the right thing today. Not just for your children but for his legacy. For everything he built. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, Do you think it'll actually change anything? All those promises the airline made. I think it will if you hold them accountable. And you will. Your brother will. I will. We don't let things go our family. We see them through. It's exhausting though. Having to fight for basic respect. Having to turn every instance of discrimination into a teachable moment, a policy change, a battle. Eleanor reached over and took her son's hand. I know, baby. I know it's exhausting. But that's the work. That's what we do. We fight so the next generation has it a little bit easier. And then they fight so their children have it easier still. Until one day maybe no one has to fight at all. You really think we'll get there? Marcus asked. I have to believe we will. Otherwise, what's the point? They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, two people who understood the weight of carrying a legacy while trying to build a better future. Upstairs, Zara lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Amara's soft breathing from the other bed in the room. Elijah was in the next room over, probably sprawled out like a starfish the way he always slept. She thought about everything that had happened. About Sandra's cruel comments. About the other passengers who'd watched and done nothing until it was almost too late. About Jessica who'd been too scared to do the right thing. About her father who'd stayed so calm even when Zara could see he was angry. She thought about what she wanted to be when she grew up. She'd always loved planes, loved aviation. But now she was thinking about it differently. If she became a pilot or an airline executive or even just someone who traveled a lot for work, she could make sure people were treated better. She could be someone who spoke up, who intervened, who changed things. She pulled out the small journal she always traveled with and started writing. Today I learned that being quiet when bad things happen is the same as helping bad things happen. I learned that my dad is brave even when he's scared. I learned that I want to be the kind of person who makes things better, not the kind who just watches. I learned that I can be angry and still be good. That anger at unfairness is okay as long as you use it to fix things instead of to hurt people. I learned that my last name means something, but it shouldn't have to mean something for people to treat me right. Everyone deserves respect, not just people with important last names. I don't want to forget today. It hurt, but it also taught me who I want to be. She closed the journal and eventually fell asleep. In the master bedroom, Eleanor also lay awake. She was thinking about her husband, about Thomas, and about all the conversations they'd had about why he'd started the airline in the first place. It had been 1995, and Thomas had been traveling for business constantly. He'd watched how people were treated differently based on race, on appearance, on perceived wealth. He'd experienced it himself. The assumptions, the second-class treatment, the casual cruelty of people who thought their biases were invisible. And he'd decided to build something different. An airline that didn't just say it valued all passengers but actually demonstrated it through policy, through training, through accountability. He'd built Harrison Atlantic to be a model for how things should be. And for a while it had been. But Thomas had been gone for 3 years now, and Eleanor could see how things had started to slip. How the policies had remained but the spirit behind them had faded. How the diversity Thomas had insisted on had become tokenism. How the accountability measures had become rubber stamps. Today had been a wake-up call. A painful one. But maybe a necessary one. Eleanor made a decision. Tomorrow she'd call James. She'd tell him about what happened. And then she'd tell him that she was coming out of retirement to rejoin the board of Harrison Atlantic. Not to run it, James was doing a fine job with that. But to be the guardian of her husband's vision. To make sure that what he'd built continued to mean something. To make sure that the changes Marcus had demanded weren't just promises but became reality. Thomas would have wanted that. And Eleanor was going to make sure it happened. The next morning, over breakfast in Eleanor's sunny kitchen, the children seemed more like themselves. Elijah was bouncing in his chair, excited about all the things they were going to do in London. Amara was already sketching the view from the kitchen window. And Zara was asking her grandmother about the history of the house, about the neighborhood, about everything. Marcus watched them and felt grateful. They were resilient. They were strong. They were going to be okay. His phone rang. It was James. "Hey brother," Marcus answered. "I'm hearing some interesting reports from London," James said. "All good things, I hope?" "Depends on your definition of good. I'm hearing that you've basically restructured our airline's entire HR and training departments in the span of one flight." Marcus smiled. "I made some suggestions for improvement." "Some suggestions," James repeated. "Marcus, you've essentially mandated a complete overhaul of how we handle discrimination complaints, how we train our staff, and how we hold people accountable. Is that a problem?" "No," James said firmly. "It's perfect. It's exactly what Dad would have done. I just wish we'd done it sooner before you and the kids had to go through all that. Better late than never. I've already started implementing everything. The HR team is working on the new training program. We're hiring a dedicated discrimination response team. And I'm bringing in consultants to audit our hiring practices across the board." "Good," Marcus said. "And Mom's probably going to call you today. She's got some ideas too." James groaned. "Oh God, what's she planning?" "You'll have to ask her. But I think you'll like it." After breakfast, Eleanor took the children to Hyde Park while Marcus handled some calls. The park was beautiful and the kids ran ahead, Elijah trying to catch pigeons while his sisters laughed at him. Mrs. Chen had called Marcus that morning. So had Derek. And Priya. All offering support, all asking if there was anything they could do. Marcus thanked them and told them that their willingness to speak up, even after the fact, had mattered. That it had shown his children that not everyone stays silent. Derek mentioned that he'd already posted an article on his legal blog about the incident. No names, no identifying details, just a thorough discussion of why these incidents still matter and what legal protections exist for passengers facing discrimination. Priya had posted on her social media about her experience witnessing the discrimination, and it had already been shared thousands of times. People were angry. People cared. And that gave Marcus hope. 2 days later, the Harrison family boarded another Harrison Atlantic flight, this time to Paris for a day trip Eleanor had planned. Marcus was nervous. The kids were nervous. But they'd agreed as a family that they wouldn't let one bad experience keep them from flying. The crew on this flight was different. Completely different. The head flight attendant, a Latina woman named Maria, greeted them warmly as they boarded. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Harrison. Zara, Amara, Elijah, it's wonderful to have you flying with us today." She knew their names. She'd clearly been briefed. But her warmth felt genuine, not performative. "Thank you," Marcus said. As they settled into their seats, Marcus noticed something on Maria's uniform. A small pin next to her name tag. It looked new. "What's the pin for?" he asked. Maria smiled. "It's from the new Harrison Dignity Initiative training program. All crew members wear them now as a reminder of our commitment to treating every passenger with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or what they look like." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. The Harrison Dignity Initiative? Named after your father, Thomas Harrison. The training program launched this week. Every single crew member on every Harrison Atlantic flight has gone through it or is scheduled to go through it in the next month. "That was fast," Marcus said. "When the CEO makes something a priority, things happen fast," Maria said with a smile. "And Mr. Harrison? I just want to say thank you. For speaking up. For making sure things changed. A lot of us in the crew community have been pushing for better training and accountability for years. What you did, it finally made it happen." "You're welcome," Marcus managed to say. The flight to Paris was perfect. The service was warm and professional. The crew was attentive to everyone. And when Elijah accidentally knocked over his apple juice, because of course he did, he was 7, the flight attendant helping in their section just smiled, brought extra napkins and said, "No worries at all. Happens all the time." Amara watched this interaction carefully, and Marcus saw her relax. Saw her realize that the last flight wasn't normal. That this was how things should be. On the way back from Paris that evening, Elijah was tired and fell asleep quickly. Amara was drawing. And Zara was once again reading. But this time she put her book down and looked at her father. "Dad." "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad we flew again. I was scared, but I'm glad we did it." "Me too. And I was thinking, what happened on that first flight was bad. Really bad. But maybe something good came from it too. Because now other kids won't have to go through it." "Right." Marcus pulled his daughter close. "Right. That's exactly right. Sometimes the bad things that happen to us can be turned into something good if we handle them the right way. Like you did. Like we all did. You spoke up to Sandra. Amara was brave even though she was scared. Elijah just kept being himself. We all handled it together." Zara thought about that, then nodded and went back to her book. But Marcus could see the small smile on her face. 6 months later, Marcus was back in New York for a board meeting at Harrison Global Holdings. But first he had somewhere else to be. Harrison Atlantic had scheduled a press conference to announce the results of their first quarterly audit under the new discrimination prevention protocols. Marcus hadn't planned to attend, but Patricia Walsh had personally called and asked if he would. Not as a board member but as the person who'd catalyzed the change. He agreed, but on one condition. His children would not be mentioned by name and no photos of them would be used. The press conference was held at Harrison Atlantic's headquarters. The room was full of journalists, industry analysts, and employee representatives. Patricia stood at the podium with David Kumar and a panel of employees who'd gone through the new training program. 6 months ago, Harrison Atlantic faced a reckoning, Patricia began. An incident occurred that exposed failures in our systems, our training, and our accountability measures. We could have minimized it. We could have handled it quietly. But instead we chose to use it as a catalyst for real change. She went on to detail everything they'd implemented. The Harrison Dignity Initiative training program, which had now been completed by 100% of customer-facing staff. The dedicated discrimination response team, which had investigated 47 complaints in the first 6 months and had taken action on 32 of them, ranging from additional training to termination. The revised hiring practices, which had resulted in a 25% increase in diversity among new hires. The new complaint process, which had reduced response time from an average of 3 weeks to 72 hours. But numbers only tell part of the story, Patricia continued. The real measure of our success is in the experiences of our passengers. And I'm pleased to share that our customer satisfaction scores have increased by 15% in the past 6 months. Our complaints related to discrimination have decreased by 60%. And our employee satisfaction has increased, because our staff now feel empowered to speak up and intervene when they see problems. She paused. None of this would have happened without one person having the courage to speak up. To not just accept an apology and compensation, but to demand systemic change. I can't name that person publicly, but they know who they are, and if they're watching, I want to say thank you. You changed this company. You made us better. Marcus was watching from the back of the room. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. But he needed to see this. Needed to know it was real. After the press conference, he slipped out before anyone could recognize him. He had one more stop to make. The cemetery where his father was buried was quiet. Marcus walked through the familiar paths until he reached Thomas Harrison's headstone. Simple. Elegant. Just his name, his dates, and a single line. He believed everyone deserved to fly. Marcus stood there for a long time, not saying anything. Just being present. "I think you'd be proud, Dad," he finally said. "Of how I handled it. Of how the kids handled it. Of what came from it. We didn't let them bury it. We made them change. Real change." The wind rustled through the trees and Marcus smiled. "The kids are doing great, by the way. Zara wants to be a pilot now. She's already started taking flying lessons. Well, ground school, she's too young for actual lessons yet, but she's learning. Amara's in art therapy for kids who've experienced trauma. Her teacher says she's incredibly gifted. And Elijah's still Elijah. Happy, energetic, loving life. They're going to be okay. Better than okay." He paused. "I miss you. Every day. But I can feel you in the work we're doing. In the changes we're making. Your legacy isn't just the airline, Dad. It's the principle behind it. The belief that everyone deserves dignity and respect. And we're making sure that principle lives on." Marcus left the cemetery feeling lighter than he had in months. A year after the incident, Marcus received a letter. It was from Jessica, the young flight attendant who'd been suspended. "Dear Mr. Harrison," it read. "I don't know if you remember me. I was the flight attendant on Flight 447, the one who didn't speak up when I should have. The one you gave a second chance. I wanted you to know what that second chance meant. When I came back from my suspension, I was different. The training I went through wasn't just about policies and procedures. It made me confront my own biases, my own fears, my own complicity in systems that hurt people. I've been back flying for almost a year now, and I've intervened 4 times when I've seen crew members treating passengers unfairly. Once it was another flight attendant making assumptions about a Muslim family. Once it was a gate agent being dismissive to an elderly passenger with mobility issues. Twice it was passengers harassing other passengers based on race or perceived nationality. Every time I remembered your family. I remembered how I felt watching you be mistreated and doing nothing. And I refused to let that happen again. I'm in school now, working on a degree in social justice. I want to eventually move into training and development for the airline industry, specifically focusing on equity and inclusion. I want to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. Thank you for believing I could be better. I'm working every day to prove you right. With deepest gratitude and respect, Jessica Martinez." Marcus showed the letter to his children. Zara read it carefully, then looked up at her father. "You were right to give her another chance." "I think so," Marcus agreed. "But she did the hard work. She chose to change." "That's what matters," Zara said. "That people can change if they want to." 2 years after the incident, Marcus was invited to speak at an airline industry conference about discrimination and accountability. He almost said no. He didn't want to be defined by one incident, no matter how significant. But Eleanor convinced him. "You have a platform now," she said. "Use it. Tell your story. Help others understand why this matters." So Marcus stood in front of 300 airline executives, managers, and industry leaders, and he told them about Flight 447. He told them about his children's fear. About the humiliation. About the anger. About the decision to fight back. "The question I get most often," Marcus said, "is whether I regret making it public. Whether I regret pushing for systemic change instead of just accepting an apology and compensation. And the answer is no. Because what happened to my family happens every single day to families who don't have my resources, who don't have my connections, who don't have my last name. And they deserve justice just as much as I do." He paused, looking out at the audience. "Every person in this room has the power to make change. You can implement training programs. You can create accountability systems. You can hire diversely. You can listen to complaints instead of dismissing them. You can empower your employees to speak up instead of punishing them for it. You can build cultures where dignity and respect aren't just words in a mission statement but are lived values. Or you can do nothing. You can maintain the status quo. You can tell yourselves that these are isolated incidents, that most people don't experience discrimination, that you're already doing enough. But I'm here to tell you that you're not. None of us are. Not yet. Not while families like mine still face what we faced. So I'm asking you, which side of history do you want to be on?" The speech was met with a standing ovation. Afterward, at least 50 executives approached Marcus with questions, with commitments to implement similar programs at their airlines, with requests for consulting help. Marcus directed them all to the Harrison Dignity Initiative, which had expanded beyond Harrison Atlantic and was now available to any airline wanting to implement it. Change was happening. Slowly. But it was happening. 3 years after the incident, Zara was 13 and had just soloed in a glider for the first time. Marcus wasn't there, she'd been at a special aviation camp, but she called him immediately afterward, breathless with excitement. "Dad, I flew. By myself. It was the most amazing thing I've ever done." Marcus felt tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I kept thinking about that flight. About Flight 447. About how scared I was then and how powerful I feel now. Like I took something that hurt me and turned it into something that makes me strong." "That's exactly what you did," Marcus said. "And that's exactly who you are." Amara, at 11, had her artwork featured in a gallery show about resilience and healing. One of her pieces was called 47. It showed 3 children sitting on an airplane, holding hands, with storm clouds outside the window but light breaking through. It was purchased by a collector for $15,000, all of which Amara donated to a nonprofit that provided legal aid to people facing discrimination. Elijah at 10 was still just Elijah, happy, energetic, loving life. But he'd also become passionate about social justice, constantly asking questions about why the world was unfair and what could be done about it. He'd started a diversity club at his school, and he never, ever let anyone be excluded or treated badly if he could help it. Marcus watched his 3 children grow, and he saw how that one flight had shaped them. Not broken them. Shaped them. Made them stronger. Made them more aware. Made them fighters for justice. 5 years after the incident, Sandra Patterson resurfaced. She'd written a book. It was called The Flight That Changed Me, One Woman's Journey from Prejudice to Understanding. Marcus heard about it through the airline industry grapevine and was initially angry. Was she profiting from what she'd done? But when he actually read the book, his anger softened. It was honest. Painfully honest. Sandra wrote about growing up in a small town where casual racism was so normalized she didn't even recognize it as racism. About how she'd absorbed those attitudes without questioning them. About how 20 years of flying had reinforced her biases because she was surrounded by people who thought the same way. About how she genuinely believed she wasn't racist because she'd never used slurs or been overtly hateful. She wrote about the day on Flight 447 in excruciating detail. Every moment. Every terrible thing she'd said and done. And she wrote about the aftermath. The firing. The public shame. The loss of her career. But then she wrote about what came after. How she'd been forced to confront her own biases. How she'd gone to therapy. How she'd volunteered with civil rights organizations. How she'd listened to the stories of people who'd faced discrimination and really, truly heard them for the first time. How she'd spent the last 5 years trying to make amends, trying to be better, trying to undo even a fraction of the harm she'd caused. The final chapter was addressed to Marcus and his children. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote. "I don't expect you to even read this. But if you do, I want you to know that you changed my life. You held up a mirror and forced me to see who I really was. And I didn't like what I saw. I've spent the last 5 years trying to become someone better. Someone who would never hurt children the way I hurt yours. I can't undo what I did. But I can make sure that the rest of my life stands for something different. That I use my experience to help others recognize and confront their own biases before they cause the kind of harm I caused. I'm sorry. I'll always be sorry. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance that life has given me." Marcus put the book down and sat with it for a while. Then he called Eleanor. "Have you seen Sandra Patterson's book?" he asked. "I have," Eleanor said. "What do you think?" "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that real change is possible. Even for people we might have thought were beyond change. The question is whether the change is genuine or performative." "I think it's genuine," Marcus said. "The book doesn't make excuses. It doesn't try to paint her as the victim. It's just honest. Painfully honest." "Then maybe there's hope for all of us," Eleanor said. Marcus never reached out to Sandra. He didn't feel the need to. But he didn't speak against her book either. When journalists asked him about it, he simply said, "If her journey helps other people recognize and confront their own biases, then something good came from something bad. That's all I can ask for." 10 years after the incident, Marcus stood in the Harrison Atlantic headquarters in New York City for the dedication of a new training center. It was called the Thomas Harrison Center for Dignity in Aviation. It was where every new employee would go through comprehensive training on bias, discrimination, equity, and inclusion. Where existing employees would return regularly for refresher courses. where industry professionals from other airlines could come to learn and improve their own programs. The center was beautiful, state-of-the-art, and it represented everything Thomas Harrison had believed in. At the dedication ceremony, Marcus stood at the podium with his mother, his brother, and his 3 children, now 20, 18, and 17. "My father believed that how we treat people when they're vulnerable tells us who we really are," Marcus said. "And air travel is a uniquely vulnerable experience. You're in an enclosed space, 30,000 feet in the air, completely dependent on the crew for your safety and comfort. When people are mistreated in that environment, it's particularly damaging. 10 years ago, my family experienced that mistreatment. And we made a choice. We could have walked away, accepted an apology and some free flights and moved on with our lives. But we chose to fight for change. Not just for us, but for every family that comes after us. And the result is this center. These programs. This commitment to making sure that every person who steps onto a Harrison Atlantic aircraft is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." He paused, looking out at the audience. Airline employees, industry leaders, civil rights advocates, and ordinary passengers who'd been affected by the changes. "My children are here today. Zara, Amara, and Elijah. They were 10, 8, and 7 when this happened. It shaped them. It hurt them. But it also taught them that their voices matter. That standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, can create real change. Zara is now a commercial pilot in training. Amara is an artist and activist. Elijah is starting college next year with plans to study law and social justice. They took their pain and turned it into purpose. And I couldn't be more proud." The 3 siblings stood and the audience applauded. Zara stepped up to the microphone. "I remember that flight like it was yesterday," she said. "I remember being scared and confused. I remember wondering why that woman hated us when she didn't even know us. But I also remember my dad staying calm, staying strong, showing us that we didn't have to accept being treated badly, that we had the right to speak up, that our dignity mattered. That lesson changed my life. It made me who I am. And now, when I fly, when I'm in the cockpit as a pilot, I carry that lesson with me. Every passenger on my aircraft will be treated with respect. Every single one. No exceptions." Amara spoke next. "I was the quiet one that day. I didn't say much. I just cried and held my sister's hand. But I was watching everything, learning everything. And what I learned is that silence in the face of injustice is a choice. That being quiet when bad things happen makes us complicit. My art is loud now. It speaks up. It refuses to be silent. And that comes from that day." Elijah, now 17 and nearly as tall as his father, was last. "I spilled the juice that day," he said, and there was a ripple of knowing laughter through the audience. "I was 7 years old and I spilled maybe 4 ounces of apple juice, and I thought my whole world was ending because this woman was so angry at me. But my dad told me I didn't do anything wrong. That accidents happen. That her reaction was about her, not about me. I carry that with me. When people try to make me feel small because of my race, because of their biases, I remember, it's about them, not about me. I refuse to let other people's prejudices define me. And I'm going to spend my life making sure other kids don't have to learn that lesson the way I did." The dedication ceremony ended with a moment of silence for Thomas Harrison, followed by the unveiling of a plaque, the Thomas Harrison Center for Dignity in Aviation, dedicated to the belief that every person, regardless of race, background, or circumstance, deserves to be treated with respect. Founded in memory of Thomas Harrison and inspired by the courage of those who speak up when others stay silent. May we never forget that change begins with one voice refusing to accept injustice. That evening, the Harrison family had dinner together at Eleanor's house, the same house where they'd stayed 10 years ago after that first flight. As they sat around the table, Eleanor raised her glass. "To Thomas," she said, "who started this journey. And to Marcus and his beautiful children, who made sure it continued." They all raised their glasses. "To Grandpa," the 3 siblings said in unison. "And to change," Marcus added. "To the kind of change that lasts." As they ate and talked and laughed, Marcus looked around the table and felt a profound sense of peace. What had happened 10 years ago had been terrible. It had hurt his children. It had exposed ugly truths about the world. But it had also led to this. To meaningful change. To policies that protected thousands of passengers. To training that educated tens of thousands of employees. To a cultural shift in the airline industry. To his children growing into powerful advocates for justice. To Jessica finding her calling. To Sandra confronting her prejudices. To countless people speaking up instead of staying silent. The flight that had started as a nightmare had become a catalyst for transformation. Not just for one airline but for an industry. Not just for one family but for countless families who would never know that their easier, more dignified travel experiences were because 3 children and their father had refused to stay silent. That was the real legacy of Flight 447. Not the pain. Not the discrimination. But what came after. The choice to transform trauma into change. To use privilege and platform not just for personal benefit but for systemic improvement. To teach children that their voices matter and that speaking up is worth it, even when it's hard. As Marcus tucked Elijah in that night, yes, 17 and still sometimes wanting his dad to tuck him in, Elijah said, "Dad, do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" That flight. Marcus thought about it. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "I wish you 3 hadn't had to experience that pain. But I don't wish away what came from it. The change. The awareness. The impact." "Me neither," Elijah said. "Because if it hadn't happened to us, it would have kept happening to other people. And they might not have been able to fight back like we did." "Exactly. So in a way," Elijah continued, "we kind of saved people we'll never meet. People who'll fly and be treated well and never know that it's because we spoke up." Marcus felt tears in his eyes. "Yeah, buddy. That's exactly right." "That's pretty cool," Elijah said, smiling. "It is pretty cool." Marcus kissed his son's forehead and turned off the light. On his way out, he passed Amara's room. She was still up, sketching. "You okay, baby girl?" "I'm good, Dad. Just working on something." "What are you drawing?" Amara held up her sketchbook. It was an airplane flying through clear blue skies. Inside the windows you could see diverse faces, people of all races, all ages, all backgrounds. All smiling. All safe. All treated with dignity. "It's called How It Should Be," Amara said. "It's beautiful," Marcus said. "Just like you." In Zara's room she was studying flight manuals, technical documents, everything she'd need for her commercial pilot's license test in a few months. "Don't stay up too late," Marcus said. "I won't." "Hey, Dad." "Yeah. Thank you. For showing us how to fight. How to stand up. How to make the world better. You 3 make it easy to fight," Marcus said. "You're what I'm fighting for." That night, as Marcus lay in bed in his old childhood bedroom in his mother's house, he thought about the journey. About how one terrible flight had set in motion a decade of change. About how his 3 children had taken their trauma and transformed it into strength. About how an industry had been forced to confront its failures and do better. About how even people like Sandra, who'd caused harm, could choose to grow and change if they were willing to do the hard work. And he thought about his father, Thomas Harrison, who'd built an airline on the belief that everyone deserved dignity. "We did it, Dad," Marcus whispered into the darkness. "We made sure your dream didn't die. We made it stronger. We made it real. And we're going to keep making it real, every single day for as long as we can." The wind outside rustled through the trees and Marcus smiled. He could almost hear his father's voice saying what he always said, "That's all I can ask. That's all any of us can ask. To leave the world a little better than we found it. To fight for what's right. And to teach our children to do the same. You did good, son. You did real good." 10 years after Flight 447, Marcus Harrison sat in Seat 2A on a Harrison Atlantic flight, the same seat number where it had all begun. But this time was different. This time, his children were in different seats throughout the cabin, all in different stages of their lives and journeys. This time, the flight attendant who greeted him was warm, professional, and wore that small pin, the Harrison Dignity Initiative pin, with pride. This time, as the plane lifted off and climbed through the clouds toward blue sky, Marcus closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't felt on that flight a decade ago. Hope. Hope that change was possible. Hope that speaking up mattered. Hope that the world could be better, would be better, was getting better. One flight, one voice, one brave choice at a time. And somewhere in the sky, in the space between who we are and who we can become, 3 children who'd learned about injustice too young were carrying forward a legacy. Not a legacy of pain, but a legacy of resilience. Not a legacy of silence, but a legacy of standing up. Not a legacy of accepting the world as it is, but a legacy of demanding the world as it should be. That was the real story of Flight 447. Not the discrimination. Not the humiliation. But the transformation that came after. The choice to let pain become purpose. The decision to turn trauma into triumph. The commitment to ensure that speaking up, standing up, and refusing to accept injustice would always matter. Because in the end, that's how change happens. Not through grand gestures or perfect heroes, but through ordinary people deciding that enough is enough. Through fathers protecting their children while teaching them to protect others. Through 10-year-olds asking hard questions and demanding honest answers. Through 7-year-olds learning that spilled juice is just spilled juice, and their worth is not determined by other people's prejudices. Through communities of passengers deciding to witness and validate instead of looking away. Through employees choosing to intervene instead of maintaining complicit silence. Through companies choosing accountability over reputation management. Through families choosing to fight not just for themselves but for everyone who comes after. That's how the world changes. One flight at a time. One voice at a time. One choice at a time. And it all started because Marcus Harrison sent a 3-sentence text message at 30,000 feet and refused to let injustice have the last word. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that speaking up matters, share it. Subscribe. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders. Reminders that we all have power. That our voices matter. That change is possible. And that the legacy we leave isn't measured by what happened to us, but by what we chose to do about it. The Harrison family chose to fight. What will you choose? In loving memory of every person who has faced discrimination and found the strength to speak up. In honor of every child who has had to learn about injustice too soon. And in celebration of everyone who refuses to stay silent when they witness wrong. You are the change. You always have been.